Hello, welcome to Autistic Chess Openings. We're covering the Scotch Gambit as white, line number 8. All right, let's review today's line. Scotch Gambit, knight f6 variation. This is our third time covering it, the most common response to the Scotch Gambit. So they go knight f6, we push the pawn. We have previously covered at this point knight to g4 as well as d5 and then knight to e4. And today we're just covering a straight knight to e4, which is surprisingly just as strong but way more obscure. So they go knight to e4, we attack it with our queen. They back off to c5, their only good move. We go c3 with our pawn, and at this point if they take, we know that they don't know their opening. And if they don't take, then maybe they do. So they take is the most common response 45% of the time, and then we take back with the knight, and we no longer have to worry about playing obscure moves because our opponent is already out of book. They move their bishop, we move ours. Bishop to e7, bishop to e3. We are attacking their knight on c5. They are defending it, but now their bishop has to babysit it. And so we can then use that to our advantage later. So they castle kingside, we castle queenside. So we did their bishop, our bishop, they castled, we castled, they push a flank pawn, we push a flank pawn. Those are the next two moves. h6, getting ready for a b5 thrust, trying to get our bishop off that diagonal because it's making them uncomfortable because they want to be able to push f6 and get the rook into the game and get their position more protected. Their king side is looking kind of vulnerable. Also, maybe they're thinking about a queenside attack. So they go a6 and we go h4. The reason for this move is not a pawn storm, but to support our knight on g5. To add support to that square. It's backed up by two pieces, so we can't just take it. Then he goes b5 attacking our bishop. We go to d5 with our bishop to stay on that light square diagonal aiming at their king. They then develop their bishop to a square because never move the same piece twice is what we've been told. So they're looking for things they can do to develop, and they go bishop to b7, and that is a blunder because now we launch our attack. They wasted too much time. We take the knight. They take back. Now our knight can go to g5 without losing it to a bishop. Why do we want a knight there? Because it attacks the right squares. A bishop would not. And the knight covers h7, which is normally protected by their knight on f6, but their knight's been driven, so it's not there, so we attack h7. We're preparing an attack on the h7 square, on the light squared. We've got a queen and a bishop that can go to the light squares, and their pawn on f7 is pinned. So it's hard to drive that knight, so they usually go h6. And this is where you got to find the right move. Two games reached this point, and they weren't low-rated players. Queen h5 was played by a couple 2100 players, but that is not the killer move. The killer move is queen e4. Queen e4 ends the game instantly. We're going to checkmate them or get their queen. So as soon as we go queen e4, we're threatening checkmate on h7. They take our knight, we take back. They take our pawn check, we block with the f-pawn. Their queen cannot stop the checkmate on h7, and it's also under attack at the same time. We're threatening checkmate and their queen. Their queen tries to move to defend it, it just falls to the rook. If they move the queen to g6, which is the next move that I'm putting in here because it looks intuitive, we just take it because that f-pawn's pinned, and now checkmate happens on h7, and that's the end of the line. All right, let's review the line now and get into the details. All right, so Scotch Gambit, knight f6. All right, let's pull up the cheat sheet. And for those of you who are new to this, and this is your first video, this is my custom written program that shows pre-calculated Stockfish scores. Stockfish is the best chess player in the world. Stockfish 18, it's a program. And it gives scores as to it tells you the evaluation in hundredths of a pawn. So 0.41 is 41 100ths of a pawn. And I've got these pre-calculated to a depth of 200 million nodes. A node is kind of like a position that comes off of this position. So if they go knight f6, Stockfish has looked 200 million positions from that point in time forward, trying to pick the most likely, the candidates that are the most likely good using a very complicated pruning process called alpha-beta pruning, and looking 200 million positions forward from that position just at the good stuff to come up with this score, its evaluation. 200 million sounds like a lot, but it's really not enough when things get really hairy, but most of the time it's good enough. I'd like to go a billion, but I need better equipment for that. So, but I've found ways to compensate for that, so it's okay. So they go knight f6, and that's what these scores are over here. So we do e5. All right, so we covered knight g4, we covered d5, now we're covering knight e4. They jump in the middle. And look at the scores here. It's surprisingly good. At this point in time, at this depth, Stockfish actually likes it best, and yet it is not very popular. So you want a branching off point as black? That's a good one. Go knight e4 instead of d5 and knight e4. It's a completely different game, which throws people off their opening book. And again, I still advocate for it is far more of a dominant factor to know your opening much better than your opponent than it is to pick an opening that has a good initial score. If you know your opening way more than your opponent, like 5 moves deeper, you're way more likely to come out of the opening with an advantage than you are picking a strong opening and in the first place, but you picked a popular one and now your opponent knows it just as good as you. So obscurity matters a lot more than a strong opening. And this is why I do take into account engine strength, but I do not make it be the biggest factor. The biggest factor is how well you know your opening compared to how well they know theirs. You need a big imbalance there. And the more obscure your opening that you pull them into, the point in which you branch off what's common, that from that point onward, your depth of knowledge from that point onward compared to their depth of knowledge, that difference is the dominant factor as to whether you come out with an advantage in the opening against humans, not computers. This only works with humans. And thankfully, there's no tournaments against humans against computers. We're not training to beat computers, and we can't beat computers. We're training against humans. All right, so Queen e2. There's several good responses here. Queen e2, bishop d5, and castling. They're all good. You can play any one of them. I've been mapping queen e2 because I mapped all of them and then came back after a lot of mapping, very deep and wide, deciding that I like queen e2 best. And I explain why in some of my other videos. I don't want to take a bunch of time on this one. So we go queen e2. Their knight, after we do queen e2, only has one good retreat, knight c5. If they play d5, you just take en passant, and you've got a massive advantage. So they go knight c5. So they go knight c5, and now again we have two good options, c3 and castling. This was a harder choice. I really liked the castling one, but I like the c3 just a little bit better. So I'm going to do the c3 variation. It also lets us determine right away. We demand show your hand. Are you a player who knows your openings well and is therefore a strong player? Because all strong players know their openings well, and if they don't, then they're not strong players, and their rating is not going to get past a certain point until they start doing that. So we find out, because 45% of the time, almost half the time, black takes at this point in time. And in fact, if you turn the rating lower, let's go down to 1800 and below. Suddenly, it's not 45% take that pawn, 60% take that pawn. If you take away 1800 players and go to 1600 and below, 63%. Go a little lower. Okay, 64. All right, so it's in the 60s as it gets low. So almost 2/3 of the time, the lower rated players are going to take that pawn. And you will know immediately that they don't know their opening, and you don't need to start playing anymore after this point in time for obscurity, which we won't do anymore after this point in time. If they take, which is what we're going to do today, because that is the lion's share, and we need to know how to respond to it and punish it optimally. So they take after we do c3, and now, let's see, they take, there it is. They take, and then we take back with the knight. That's our only good move. And they give us a free development there. That's really important in an opening where tempo matters dramatically here, because of this pushed center pawn that's driven their knight off of f6, and then they're going to castle into that, because castling on the other side is going to be too difficult. So, or at least it will be shortly. At this point, the most common move is bishop e7. 64% of the time that gets played. And it's interesting to see that the lower rated players are doing that bishop e7 53% of the time. And then you would expect the high rated players who get to this point, who clearly don't know their opening, and yet they're high rated because they're a really good chess player. Otherwise, other than not knowing their opening, they're doing it 75% of the time. And yet bishop e7 is the second best move, not the best move. Knight e6 is. So I found it interesting that the high-rated players are doing the inferior move more frequently than the lower-rated players. So I thought I'd show you that little detail. All right. So bishop e7, definitely the most common move. Almost 2/3 of the time is going to be played amongst all ratings. So we're going to prepare for that first. All right, bishop e7, bishop e3. Just like I showed in the summary at the beginning, we are putting pressure on the c5 knight so that the bishop on e7 has to babysit it, and we can distract it whenever we want to. It creates a dependency. The knight depends on the bishop for safety. All right, so let's catch up our mapper here. So we had the pawn take, the knight took, bishop e7, a score of 85. We're 85 points ahead at that point. Then we go bishop e3, and guess what? It changed its mind. We're 102 points ahead. And then after we do the move, it goes back to 81. So clearly that 102 was just a temporary spike, just like the stock market. So it was 85, then it was 102, then it was 81. And so clearly our advantage is somewhere in the 80s there, in my opinion. However, at this point, their top engine move is extraordinarily difficult to find because it's extremely counterintuitive. How many times has it been drilled into our heads by high-rated players saying to us, I'm saying us, as if you're a lower-rated player, because I am, and it's easy to forget that I might be talking to an audience who actually wants to learn their opening and is a high-rated player. Anyway, okay, but isn't it often given out as advice that you should never move the same piece twice in the opening, especially before you've castled, especially before your center pawns have been moved, and especially before you've developed your pieces behind them? And that's exactly the case right here. And just like that in one of our other videos, the same thing happened. We needed to move the same piece twice. Just like in that position, the position had a king side that was looking like a sitting duck, and it's kind of doing that here. Black is feeling a lot of pressure here because of our center pawn. Their knight on f6 is gone. The d pawn is hard to push. Their bishop can't get out, and they need to castle. All that's going on, and they need to play knight a5. They need to move the same piece twice. That's what the engine's saying. I mean, look over here. 81 points for knight a5. The second best move, knight e6. And therefore, I disagree that we should never move the same piece twice in the opening. I disagree with that. Here's my rule, okay? If I find a rule, let me back up just a step. If I find a rule that's correct much of the time and then false a smaller amount of the time, but still a significant percentage, then it's not a rule. It's a guideline. No, we need to change the rule. If you have a law that's a law most of the time and then sometimes it's not a law, then it's not a law. You need to find a better way of phrasing the rule. So here's my version of the rule, okay? Instead of saying don't move the same piece twice in the opening, instead say this. At any given time, whether it's the opening, the middle game, or the end game, play the best move. Based on the position, play the best move for that position at that point in time. That's an autistic point of view. That's my details, seeing the world as the composition of its details point of view. Play the best move. And then you might say, well, define that. What is the best move? The best move is the move that makes your position as powerful as possible and your opponent's position as weak as possible, or a combination of the two. And so for us, it's a judgment call. For the engine, it's cold, hard math. And sometimes with the cold, hard math of the engine, it'll find multiple moves that are that way. But I'm finding it to often be the case that it's not. We think there's a lot of room for forgiveness in the openings, and sometimes there is. Sometimes the engine says there is, and the engine is the close thing we can have to an oracle that knows the truth. But often, putting a knight, in an opening, putting your knight at c3 or putting your knight at f3 at a given moment in time, we look at that and say, they're equal. They're both developing moves. They both cover the center. And the engine's like, do knight c3 here and not knight f3. If you do knight c3, it's real powerful. If you do knight f3, you lose 30 points. That's often the case I am finding as I map more and more positions in many, many openings. So we're being told something that is not the case. The engine is telling us something different. And it's telling us that there are cases where you need to move the same piece twice. Therefore, the rule of don't move the same piece twice in the opening is invalid. Therefore, the rule needs to change. So here's my version. Play strong stuff. Play what's best. In any position, even in the opening, play the move that's strongest. And often that is moving a piece that hasn't been moved before and getting more pieces onto the board, because initially there's hardly anything out. And so it makes sense. You're playing paintball, you send a guy out, they take cover in a position and cover things, then you send another guy out in a different direction, they take cover, covering things, and you put one guy out, another guy out, and you mobilize your army. But we're finding openings, and I seek them out to throw at my opponents, where it defies that dogma we've been taught of never move something twice. They need to go knight a5 here. And if you map it, you can figure out why. I haven't mapped it because look how often it's happening. Knight a5, ready? Once. 714 games, it got played once. Okay? And that knight a5, happened with a 1400 player and a 1500 player. They found it by accident. If you come back to the castle move, average rating 1841. The top rated players are castling. Look how bad castling is. It puts black 175 points behind. If they do knight a5, that move that looks amateur, then we're only 81 points ahead. It's a much better move. They restrict our score from getting huge. That's one of the reasons I chose this line, is because there's counterintuitive moves there for our opponent. The bad moves look good. The good moves look bad. That's exactly what I mean when I say tricky or nasty. We're looking for tricky lines. We want engine strength, but we're playing humans, so we want trickiness. Computers aren't gonna fumble to trickiness. Humans will. So they need to go knight a5 here. No one's finding it. And because of that, we can assume our score is not going to be 81, but 145 or better. So if we go back two moves, it said our score was 85. If they do bishop e7, then it said it's 102, then it went back down to 81. But see, that's all assuming they're not playing they're playing top engine moves. They're not going to do that here. They're going to play castling, most likely 56% of the time, and maybe knight e6. Both of those are dramatically worse than the top engine moves. So we're going to gain a lot more points here in our position, a lot more strength. They castle kingside. So we're going to plan for that, because that is the dominant move more than half the time they castle. And it's hard to figure out how to develop their d-pawn and their bishop. And so it's easy to just go, well, I know castling's a good move. It always is. And I know that developing things is always good. And getting castled and getting developed and pushing the center pawns and getting our pieces out. Therefore, I'm going to get this done, and I'm not going to think because I know it's a good move. And that is what makes them fail, is following the principles they've always been taught. And so when I say in my little blurb, when you're looking at my videos, I'm creating anti-human lines, this is what I mean. This is an anti-human line. So they go castle kingside. And now take a look at this. After they castle kingside, castling queenside is, for white, the most common move, 69% of the time. But look at what the engine has to say. It agrees that that's an awesome move and should be done. In this case, the engine agrees with the popular vote. But look at how big of a difference it is. Castling queenside, 177 points. The second best move, 75 points. It's h4. And we're going to play h4 in a minute, just not right now. We need to castle queenside first. It'll be part of our attack. So the top two moves are part of a kingside attack that's very specific. So again, the details matter. So we castle queenside. That lines up our rook against their queen opposing it and makes them hesitant to push their d-pawn. It also tucks our king away, and it creates a number of issues in the line that they're going to try and defend against us as we launch our attack at them. Now, and here's what's cool. Another reason I really love this line is, let's see here, castle queenside. Yeah, let me get caught up here. Castle queenside, castle queenside. Okay, we got them in the same spot. All right, a6. Look at this. Okay, so their next turn, it's evenly split, just about, between a6, knight e6, and d6. Three common moves, all roughly, 20 to 25% of the time. If you learn how to fight all three of those together, you got almost 75% coverage. And yet, a6 is slightly more popular. And look how bad it is. a6 is 334 points behind us. So they need to play b6 here. 7% are playing that. Knight e6 is a lot more intuitive to find. 23% are playing that. But a6, 334 points. It's a blunder, a really bad one. They need to do something about their kingside, or they need to create complications immediately on the queen side to distract us from our kingside attack. And that's what some of these alternatives do. Let's see here, queen e8, b6. b5 now, immediately. Don't do a6 first, is much better than a6 and then b5. So anyway, we are threatening their kingside. Can you see at this stage where and how? Well, you saw the review, so yeah, you do. But now look at it with scores. All right, so they did a6. Look at h4, 301. These others, 233, 233, and in typical fashion, I glanced down those because I'm only going to a depth of 200 million and not a billion or more. And why do I keep saying a billion? Because a billion is what I tested out, and it's able to see the things it couldn't see and have a lot more accurate scores that don't fluctuate as much. So I'd prefer to go a billion. Anyway, you look down all of them, h4 dominates, and it sets up a nasty attack. So h4 is our top move. They attack on the flank. we attack on the flank. We've got control of the center. We can't break through. We need reinforcements. We're going to send out reinforcements. In this case, it's not an attacker. It's a supporter. It's going to support our knight to g5. So when you see someone throw their flank pawn up 2 squares, it might be for a storming of the position, or it might be to support something that needs to jump into the square it now covers, like a bishop pinning a queen to a king. So when someone throws out a pawn, glance at what it might be supporting, not just what it might storm. All right, so we go h4, they go b5. They prepared a6 for the purpose of b5. Again, they drop another 100 points. They're 400 points behind here. They are losing this game, but only if we find how we cash in those points, those tickets that we got at the fun house. How do we cash them in for our prizes? So that's what we need to see here. Points in and of themselves don't win us games. They give us positions that have dominating attacks, and we need to find them or set them up, and that's why we went down those lines. All right, so at this point, bishop d5 is our top move. We need to keep our bishop on that diagonal that's pinning the f-pawn to the king. Their knight is missing from f6 because our pawn's covering it. It got driven away, so h7 is no longer defended. We can bring our knight to g5 and attack h7. We can start creating pressure, and a lot of times when you create threats on the king side, they have to push pawns to defend if they don't have pieces that can do it. Then they push those pawns, and it creates more weaknesses that we can attack, but it needs to be very specific. You have to attack the right squares with the right pieces to open up the right attacks, or it doesn't work. You can't just put lots of things aiming at it and then expect it to suddenly win. Maybe you'll get lucky sometimes, but chess is a lot more nuanced than that, and we have to be specific. So we keep our bishop pinning that f7 pawn, and take a look at if we don't. All right, bishop d5. If we don't do bishop d5 or bishop c5, everything else is our advantage of 381 goes down to 10. Or worse, they get ahead. Why is bishop c5 good? Because we're gonna take that knight on c5 and then move our bishop and keep it on that diagonal. So in other words, in both cases, abandoning the diagonal that is pinning that f-pawn to the king throws away our whole advantage. And I'm finding this to be the case. In opening after opening, the path to cash in your prizes is narrow the majority of the time, and it's because of very specific things on the board that we need to be able to see and set up. In this case, the general patterns that we're looking for our pattern recognition software in our brains is pinning an f7 pawn, driving a knight out of f6 that's defending h7, having a lot of pieces on the opposite side of the board, and then putting pressure on specific spots. In this case, where's their light squared bishop, and where's the knight that could cover the white squares? The white squares aren't covered, and the pawn that can jump forward to f5 and cover the light squares is pinned. The light squares is where we should attack because there's openings here. So let's see, we go bishop d5, they go bishop b7. So they're just blindly developing at this point. Bishop b7 happens 84% of the time. People at this point are, oh wow, I was about to say are lower rated. No, that's a 2100 player. Actually, 27 lines here are all playing bishop b7 because they don't like d6. What does the engine say they need to do here? Let's see here. Back up. Let's do bishop b7. That loses 100 points. They need to go queen e8. Or, and that's their best move, the second best, rook b8. Okay. Why? Well, that'll become apparent down the road, and I can't figure that out from here. b4. Okay, so disrupting that knight, creating immediate threats that might disrupt our attack on the king side, rushing that queen side attack. Is it going to work? No, we're 400 points ahead, but this is their best chances. But bishop b7 is like the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's like the 10th best move, and yet 84% of players rated 2100 are playing it. So we can clearly see the engine is better than humans, and humans are missing things that are really critical. All right, so they go bishop b7, and now we launch our attack. We want our knight on g5, attacking h7, and putting pressure on f7, which is pinned, which is not going to come into play, but it could if they responded certain ways, and so it's covering certain threats. Anyway, we start by taking that knight, that the bishop was babysitting, and if they don't take back, they go down a piece. So now the bishop is no longer able to take our knight when we go to g5. So let's see what the engine has to say about that. Bishop takes, top engine move. And then the others that I went down, they're nowhere near as strong, and they're nowhere near as, they don't lead to such blind areas as this line does. I've been down all those lines, and this one leads them down to areas where they are blind to the attack. Bishop takes, knight g5 is so powerful. Take a look at the common response, h6. There's only 4 games here, and 2 of them happen that way, and that's a very intuitive move. Usually you can push the pawns in front of your king position to defend, and it doesn't kill you or make you lose instantly. I should say, not make you lose. But look at it here. They need to go g6, and their score is 486. And if they do h6, it's 905. We are 905 points behind. That's a queen. We're going to win their queen or checkmate them if they do h6. And it's only if you go queen e4, which no one ever did in any of these lines. There's only 2 left. h6, queen e4. Look at how devastating that move is compared to everything else. 884 points. f4 is second at 506. King to b1 at 506. 493 for queen d3. Why king to b1? So I guess black does have some counter threats that could happen if our attack over here fails. And we need to find the path toward victory in this line. And if our opponent did different moves, we'd have to find the line of attack there. The reason it scored so high is because in all lines forward, it leads to the attack, but it could be different attacks in each line. And so that's why we're mapping very carefully, not just to learn our openings really well, but to learn how to play chess, to learn these patterns on how to attack a king's side where the f7 pawn is pinned, the knight's been driven away f6, and we have control of the light square. See those details? Look at this detail. They take with the, let's see here, h6. We go queen e4. They take, we take. Look at that detail. We were threatening checkmate on h7 with the knight, and we're still threatening checkmate on h7 after we sacrifice the knight. And I've seen that ploy be used in multiple other positions in different openings to great effect. But you sacked a knight, so it needs to be something where you checkmate him or get a significant amount of material back from that attack, so it needs to actually work. And g6 seems to stop it, but that f7 pawn's pinned, so we just take checkmate, and it's the end of the game. So the critical pieces here that make this work is they can't prevent it. And you're going to have to calculate all the little differences in other positions where you do that knight sack to make sure that after you sacrifice your knight, they cannot prevent the checkmate down that row. Sometimes it's with the queen over here on the side. Sometimes it's in the diagonal, but then they can push their pawns. You need to make sure that those don't work. And in this case, they don't. All right, so we bring our, where were we? Queen e4 is devastating. 900 points ahead. They've got no good answer. Look at this. Checkmate in 1, checkmate in 1, checkmate in 1. That's my coding for it. Here, 1,000 points ahead. 0.01, that's checkmate in 1. Down here we got mate in 10 if they go rook e8. So they can delay it by coming out here and letting us come in, and we do this kind of thing, you know. They can delay it, you know, and then anyway, and it gets messy, but you're going to win a whole bunch of material following that line, and you'll have to work that out because we're covering the common line first. All right, so they take, we take, queen takes check, and there's a check there, and now maybe they can move their queen somewhere that defends it. But they can't, not with f4. f4 attacks their queen. Now they can't waste any time. Their queen's under attack, and they're at risk of being checkmated. The only way to both move the queen and defend against checkmate is to sack the queen on the h file somewhere, or to go to g6. But remember, that f pawn is pinned, and we can just take it. And now it's checkmate on h7, and that's the end of the line, in more ways than one. All right, well, thanks for joining me today, and until next time, and thank you.